Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Burlington. It's a pleasure to have you back with us again tonight. This is our 85th version of Burlington and Beyond. We try to bring people of import, people who have meaningful messages with regard to Burlington in particular. And tonight we have probably the man who is the most important, or one of the most important, because this guy has his hand on the money spigot, and he's the one who has to determine whether what comes up and how it's spent and keeps us in line with regard to spending. I'm talking about one and only Paul Sagarino, who is the town accountant, and it's a pleasure to have him here with us this evening. And we're going to put him on the spot and ask him about monies in Burlington. What could be more appropriate than monies in Burlington? But before we do that, Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, a little bit about school, how you came to Burlington, what do you think of Burlington, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I know that we've tried to schedule this for a couple of years, and it's sort of been in conflict with my son's Little League schedule. So happy to finally have made it on the show. I grew up in Everett, a graduate of Everett High School, which I hear is a pretty good school with some pretty good former teachers. Not so sure, but
thank you. Thank you, Paul.
From there, I attended the University of Massachusetts Amherst, pursued an accounting degree. I graduated from there in 1993, entered the workforce, and shortly thereafter, I began a career at the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Division of Local Services, and the position was that of an oversight position over city and town finances.
Oh.
So I had a territory of about 27 communities that I worked with to certify their tax rates, certify their free cash, deal with them on different legal issues, and that's sort of how I got introduced to municipal finance and municipal government. Around the same time, I was married, so I'm currently married. I live in Stoneham with my wife Maria, my daughter Christina, and my son Matthew. And you know, we enjoy living in Stoneham. It's a very, very comfortable commute to get here to Burlington every day. So that's definitely a strong positive. Going back to.
How long have you been here in Burlington?
I've been in Burlington for about 12 years now.
Oh, it is.
I think when I came here, we were in the midst of fiscal 2005. So that's how you can sort of.
What are your first thoughts of Burlington?
My first thoughts when I came here, it wasn't a place where I had spent a lot of time growing up. Couple of visits to the mall, but from where I grew up, we were more likely to go to downtown Boston to do our shopping, or occasionally to the North Shore Mall. But Burlington really wasn't someplace where I had spent a lot of time as a youth. My first thoughts from coming here were it's a very well-kept community. It's amazing. The business community seems to be really separated from the residential community. Both communities seem to have a lot of pride. I noticed the parks and the schools were very well maintained.
Did you come and take a tour and look?
Yes, before you take a municipal job, that's one of the things you do, is you do a lot of research on the community. And one of the things I found when I researched the community was what a great team that they had in place at the time. Bob Mercier was the town administrator. I saw that the town was on very solid financial footing, and it was an exciting place to be. There was a lot happening. It wasn't just a suburban residential community. It had a large, booming commercial sector. So it looked like a very exciting place to work for me, as well as a community that was very strong financially.
One more quick comment before I turn you over to Larry, who is filled with profound questions for you.
Oh, I wasn't done telling you about me, so if we could go back to that.
You mentioned the first time you came here to Burlington. I have to tell you that my mother, when I mentioned I was coming to Burlington, she called it the frontier. So, but that was quite a while ago. Larry, you have some very big questions I know that you want to ask Paul. What do you think?
Well, Paul and I, we go back a while. We started talking, I think, in 2011, 2012. Some questions. And of course, I had a lot of questions back then because I just got onto Ways and Means. So, of course, I needed to know, for example, what all the various accounts were. Where was this money coming from? What did this particular account mean? What was the reserve account? How did that appear? Where did it come from? So I'm just wondering if we could just bore things up a little bit and just if we could just go over these revenue sources very quickly, but just so that we just had one amazing town meeting where I think we must have spent record amounts of or authorized the spending of records amount. So let's just go over some of these accounts real quickly, and if you could give our audience the definition of these accounts. Again, this won't take too long, folks. It's just going to be a quick recap. So I wish something would be in the Ways and Means book or some handout that when somebody does get involved in the budget process, they can go to this and just easily look it up. Anyway, we have a funding source called R&A, Raise and Appropriate. What's the meaning of that account and what's special about it?
Raise and appropriate generally refers to all the money that the town collects during the given year that is not by statute or by law delegated to go and be set aside. So the largest part of raise and appropriate would be the property tax levy. That's the entire amount of taxes that the town levies on an annual basis. Second largest category of raise and appropriate would be local receipts. That's a large category of funds that the town collects. That would include your motor vehicle excise taxes, your water revenues, building permit revenues, as well as a variety of other licenses and permits. If you have a copy made and you
Gasoline permits.
Just about any other type of revenue that the town may collect, up to and including if you pay for a copy at the library, if you pay to license your dog, birth certificate, all gets categorized as local receipt. And the third component of raise and appropriate is state aid, and that's the third largest component of the funds that the town utilizes to fund the budget on an annual basis. So that's the money that we get from the state.
For Raise and Appropriate, then, about what percentages comes from the state?
It's about 8% of the total amount of the budget.
Okay, so we're generally still responsible for the vast majority of what we spend.
Definitely the property tax levy makes up the largest component of funding the budget, but we are very fortunate compared to most communities in that we do collect a substantial amount of local receipts as well.
Okay, well, let's go on to another account, free cash. Remember you saying it's neither free nor cash, but...
That's good.
How
I'm
about
glad you
describing-
remembered that.
I love that
It's
name.
neither free nor cash. Okay, so free cash for you guys and for the folks at home is very similar to the retained earnings account of a private corporation. That is basically refers to the sum total of all the profits and losses since the company has been in business, or in this case, since the town has been in operation. So types of things that generate free cash, positive budgetary performance. When we collect more funds than we budget revenues very conservatively. So when we collect more than we budgeted and used in the budget process, that flows at the end of the year and generates additional free cash. On the other opposite side of things, on the expenditure side, when we spend less money out of the operating budget than we're authorized to, that also goes back into the town's coffers and becomes part of the free cash. So those are the two largest components of our free cash, is revenues in addition to what we appropriated, and expenditures which come in less than what we budgeted.
So this year's money that we're taking in goes to Raise and Appropriate, but for the next year it becomes free cash.
Right, at the
If it's
end
not
of,
spent.
on June 30th, we tally up all the accounts and we determine how we made out on a budgetary basis. How did the revenues come in? How did the expenditures come in? And if we have a positive operating results from that, that will generate free cash. So all the funds that were collected during this fiscal year close out on June 30th and become part of the town's free cash undesignated fund balance.
It's just the name that bothers me.
It's a
Free cash.
It's a unique terminology that I think was started at the state level. Not really sure what the
Reason
origins
for it, yeah.
of that are, but it's municipal finance lingo.
I've often thought of going to John Petrin and saying, do you have any of that free cash around?
And let's just move on to a few other accounts. How about the reserve fund?
The reserve fund is an account that's set up and it's put under the control of the Ways and Means Committee. And it is basically current year budget money set aside for emergencies. We've been very fortunate over the past probably 5 or 6 years to not have to access that. But that's money that the town can access very quickly without having to call a town meeting. We can go to the Ways and Means Committee, make the case that the funding is necessary, and Ways and Means can provide that funding during the middle of the year.
Does it vary year to year?
Well, like I say, we've historically, we start out with $200,000 when we vote the budget, and then we supplement it in January with an additional $100,000. Now, this particular year, and Larry knows this, we had an issue with a filter at the Vinebrook Water Treatment Plant, about a $75,000 unanticipated repair. So, given the situation with the water in town, this was a perfect opportunity to utilize the reserve funds. And that's what it's there for, and the Ways and Means controls that.
No, just a quick question. Do the selectmen have such a fund for emergencies?
They do not.
Okay. I know when there's been a shortfall for snow removal, they seem to be able to approve it without going through the budget process.
Right. So the way the snow and ice works in the town and in many other communities, what the selectmen are actually doing there is authorizing Public Works to overspend the budget that we provided them. We actually account for the money during the budget process. We budget $350,000 during the May town meeting. We typically spend between $750,000 and $850,000 on an average year, but we're accounting for that when we set up the next year's budget. So we already have built into next year's budget projection, you know, an additional $500,000 of anticipated deficit spending for snow and ice.
I do the same thing at home.
It's kind of funny if you look around the state, some of the larger cities have $50,000 appropriated for snow and ice, and there's a reason for that. Number one, if it doesn't snow, you don't want to have $1 million tied up in that, and at the expense of police officers, firemen, and teachers. Right. But by the same token, some of the federal aid that we sometimes receive when we have some bad snowstorms, it's required that you appropriate at least the same amount every year. So in the event that you had a real tough budget year and you had to reduce that snow and ice budget, you might not be able to receive some additional funds from FEMA because you had not lived up to your end of maintaining
matching
at least
funds.
a minimum. So that's sort of a little quirky way that snow and ice is handled here in Massachusetts.
Yeah. It sounds like very close to the reserve fund is a stabilization fund. Could you describe for people what the stabilization fund is for and how it goes in and how it comes out?
Stabilization fund is essentially the town's rainy day account. It's a savings account.
What type of things would it be used for?
It can be used, in the old days it had to be used for specific purposes, but the law was expanded to allow it to be used for anything. So town meeting appropriates money into the stabilization fund. Very similar to you taking some money out of your paycheck and setting it aside in a CD or a savings account for something you may need it for in the future. It could be used for a variety of purposes. We've sort of used it sort of just as a savings account. We could use it to fund a capital project in the future. If we're in dire straits with the budget, we could use it as an offset to, bridge a difficult budget year. But we've been very fortunate during the past several years to just, I think we supplemented it a year ago, but we use it as a true savings account. It's there in the event of an emergency, and it has some pretty stringent requirements. It requires a 2/3 vote of town meeting to access those funds. So
that
we'd have to make
makes sense.
we'd have to make a really good case to get at the money historically.
In the 10 years you've been here, have we ever used stabilization?
We have. Earlier on in my career, funding was much tighter. We were in a process where we would put some money into stabilization, take a little bit of money out of stabilization to fund particular capital items that were deemed to be very necessary. During that time, we had less funding to work with. The national economy was not in a good state, and the local economy suffered because of that. So the budgets were very, very tight for a period of time. And you know, we do expect that budgets fluctuate over the course of time. So we certainly don't anticipate that the glory years to go on forever. So we've been very fortunate that the local economy's been so good the past several years. But we definitely don't plan on that continuing on into the future.
It sounds like to me we're going to need to, in the years coming up, we're going to need to spend that stabilization fund on sidewalks. Based on proposals that we've heard. And $4 million a year, I heard a number thrown out. That's what we're going to need to spend to achieve like a 20-year plan. I think that's it. Other sources might be bonding. I mean, we decided not to take out of account, except that we're going to be borrowing the money.
Yeah, bonding is a financing method that we use for all major projects. And quite frankly, a lot of communities, they'll use bonding money to purchase police cruisers. We don't do that. We have a sort of an internal policy of it really needs to be something significant to get on our bonding schedule in excess of $500,000. And what bonding is basically just taking a loan. So what it allows us to do is do the project now and pay it back over time, similar to purchasing your home and having a mortgage. So it smooths out the expenditure over the useful life of the asset that we're producing.
Yeah.
So
you mentioned bonding as a policy that had been established beforehand. Is that something that you inherited, or something that you and John in particular, the town manager, or you know, what is the origin of? Is it?
Well, bonding, like I say, is a very common mechanism for all cities and towns to finance major capital projects.
Right.
When I came here, I was really impressed with the town's long-term financing plan, and I think we've enhanced that over the years. But we have a borrowing plan that suggests, you know, over the next 10 years, we slot out projects as to, we know that we're going to need to invest in something 10 years from now. So we have all that accounted into the long-term borrowing plan. And what we try to do is we try to mitigate those debt payments from causing the town a budget problem. So we want the debt to rise very slowly and gradually in the same manner that the entire budget is rising.
So you're looking down the road now. You and, I'm assuming when you say we, you're talking about you and John essentially.
Yep, and with Brian Curtin, the treasurer, as well.
Okay.
We work on this debt plan. And again, it's very it's really a remarkable plan that the town had in place when I came here, and I think that like I say, we've enhanced it, and we've been monitoring it very closely. We have amounts of money to be borrowed out 10 years from now, and we don't know what that is. It could be a police station, it could be an elementary school, but we know that the town will need to invest in something at that point in time, and town meeting will decide at that point in time what the most pressing need will be, but we're planning for that. We're anticipating that we will need to continue to invest in the town's infrastructure.
And also decide on the funding source. Which of these accounts do we take it from?
Well, like I say, the borrowing schedule anticipates this is the amount of our mortgage payment as we go forward, so it's anticipated that this is the amount that would come from the general fund budget.
Out of curiosity, are you exhausted like I am today? After these several town meetings and records amount of spending authorization?
Well, I'm an early to bed kind of person, so I am a little exhausted just from a sum total of a few later nights than I'm usually that usually happen for me with town meeting last week.
Yeah, but you were exhausted hearing the numbers.
Well, again, it's all planned for. So we don't. There's nothing that goes to town meeting that we think would adversely affect the financial condition of the community.
My interpretation is the outside view is that you as a town accountant go in and you're looking at what happens and what bills we have here and now. I think very few people look at it as an ongoing thing. You're looking at the future, you know where you were, what you did, and you're looking down the road. And I think it's not only interesting, it's very, very important.
And we
Like
do,
you say,
we
I mean,
do quite
I've
a bit
heard
of planning.
heard discussion about police station, high school, not too far in the future. Big money. Anyway, do you enjoy your work?
I really love my work.
Why?
Well,
There's
you know,
usually a reason. Maybe you don't have a reason for it, but
I'll tell you, one of the reasons that I really enjoy it the most is that every day you're working on something different. So on a Monday, I might be working on an financing issue related to education. The next day, it might be related to the fire department. The next day, it might be talking about a sidewalk project with the Public Works Department. So it really is a wide variety of things that you get
a lot of
you
pressure.
get involved in.
it's a lot of pressure on you, I would think, coming up with numbers for.
It's
I mean,
enjoyable. Like I say, we have a fantastic group of department heads, and you know, we have a lot of fun while we're doing the work, and we enjoy working with each other. So that makes the job, you know, very enjoyable, as well as you know, the community itself is
Put
just
you on the
phenomenal.
spot. What's the most difficult department?
The Ways and Means Committee.
Ways and Means.
Just kidding, just kidding.
Okay, I didn't hear it. They're all pretty good.
Yep, without a doubt.
Yeah. Wow. Surprises, day to day.
Other than this year's budget.
No, you know,
You have a handle, pretty much on it. Yeah. You meet often with John and Brian.
yeah, we meet several times a week. I mean, I meet with John every day. You know, Brian a little less frequently, but you know, public safety department heads, I see them every day.
Yeah.
Public Works, I see John Sanchez several times a week, and you know, the other department heads as needed as well. So.
Let me just try and sneak this question in.
Go ahead.
Okay? With all the changes in personnel from fire to treasurer to the chief administrator, do you see your job changing? You're going to have to train a few people?
Well, the job's always changing, and the state law is constantly changing. We've brought several things to town meeting for municipal modernization. You know, it's fairly well defined what we have to do on a daily basis. It's a calendar, it's a cycle that we go through in order to maintain the books, start preparing the budget for the next year. I mean, we'll be starting up that in the fall. So the budget we just passed in May, you know, we started working on that last September. So there's a big process that goes into it. It's a recurring process. Reporting to the state is done on a recurring cycle. We're audited annually by a CPA firm. So it really is, you know, once you become fluent with the cycle.
Yeah, and this is your 9th year, you said? 9th year?
12th here in
12th year.
Burlington.
Wow.
Previously, I worked in a couple other communities in various positions, as well as I was an auditor for a CPA firm as well for several years. I'm a certified public accountant. Probably the last part of the personal. Several years ago, I went back and received Masters in Public Administration from Northeastern.
Good for you.
So I was working on numbers all these years, and I said I want to try something a little bit different, a little bit more on the practice and theory continuum. So I decided to go with the MPA instead of the MBA. So.
So, for example, now that town meeting is over, what do you now focus on? Or can you take a vacation?
We have great staff in the office, so I'm always available to take a vacation. But after town meeting, what it really does is give us a good opportunity. Now we have to worry about closing out the current fiscal year that we're in. So all our efforts right now will focus on working towards that June 30th year end. We'll have to get all our accounts reconciled, and then we'll start preparing for the auditors to come in. And once we have our June 30 balances and our financial statements prepared, then we'll be submitting to the state for our free cash, and then, you know, shortly thereafter we'll be working on next year's, you know, fiscal tax rate.
Once a year that happens at the
That's
auditors?
a once a year occurrence. It's based upon the town's results for the end of the fiscal year, which ends on June 30th. So that's what we'll be working on. We'll actually, instead of working on next year like we have been for the past few months, we can focus on the current year for a little while and get the current year in order for our audit.
Okay. And let me ask you, what have been some of the changes in the 10 years that you've been serving the town? What were the major changes with the town and with the accounting practices?
It's 12 years.
12 years, okay. I apologize.
That's okay. I would say probably what some of the biggest changes are is that the amount of information that we prepare for our elected and appointed bodies has really increased a million times. I sort of like to joke when I first came here that we used to go to the Ways and Means Committee with a few notes scratched on a cocktail napkin and sort of pass it around.
You make copies for us?
Ways and Means met at the police station at the time, was not on television, so it was very informal. And in that time, I think the budget, and I think I might have shown both of you gentlemen this, was just it was a big spreadsheet with just numbers on it, no words, no discussion of revenues, no talk about what we were spending it on. It was just a giant spreadsheet of numbers that the town voted on. So in that period of time, we really enhanced.
So you've been in part responsible for organizing it so that it makes sense.
Yeah, I was
the
disappointed in the presentation of the budget. As a professional finance person, I wanted something to be proud of. So we started creating the budget book, and every year we've been able to enhance that further. A couple years ago, we voluntarily entered a program to provide a comprehensive financial annual report as part of our audit. We're required to have a simple audit, which is all of the financial statements, but what we've voluntarily wanted to do to provide better information was we entered a program to do a comprehensive annual financial report. We've received an award from a national organization the past couple of years for the audit work. That's available on the town's website. But it really provides a lot more information than the typical audit that most communities have. So
that's great.
And Paul, what was the award for?
It's for excellence in financial reporting. So it's basically an award that's based upon, we create an audit in a financial report that meets a certain national standard that's considered providing the citizens good information.
Well, it's very good. Congratulations on that. I assume the standards are being kept up.
Yep. Well, we have to if we want to win the award again. So
Paul,
we're going for the award. Excellent.
Have you ever received a phone call from John saying something like, "We made a mistake," or "We goofed on this," or?
No, but I think just during the ordinary course of business, we monitor the budget year-round. As we just stated, this budget that we just passed, we developed the numbers last fall. We went through the Ways and Means process in the winter. So it's a guesstimate as to what we're going to spend starting July 1st. So a lot of things can happen through no fault of anybody just due to the timing. So I wouldn't call them mistakes. It's just sort of the ordinary process of monitoring the budget and making sure that we make the proper adjustments during the year. If this department needs a little extra money, we make accommodations for that. If these folks aren't going to spend money, we set that money aside so that we can solve all of the problems within the amount of money that the town meeting has authorized us for.
So no phone call in the middle of the night?
No.
We want to make sure, too, that Gene Rossi was still getting his Ways and Means book.
Gene, I had to call him to remind him to come get it this year, but he did come by and get his book. So
could I be added to that list next year?
Certainly.
I appreciate that.
Paul, how do you feel about OPEB?
I think I'm really happy with what the town has done with OPEB.
OPEB.
I feel it.
I know the benefits.
Other post-employment benefits.
Post-employment, thank you. And I'm sorry, once again, you feel?
I feel as though that we're doing a very good job on a par or exceeding other communities. I don't think we're going overboard and overreacting to the problem, but I do think that we're providing just about the right amount of attention to the problem. We were able to develop a schedule a 30-year schedule. We worked a sum of money into the operating budget that's set to grow at a pretty rapid pace over the next few years. But again, it's simply a case of, I think future generations of the town will be thankful that we took these steps at this point in time. Some towns are unable to do anything about it at this point. So am I positive that the problem's ever going to be solved? I'm not, but I do think that 20 or 25 years from now, hopefully folks
Good
at town
chance
meeting
that.
will be saying, well, it's not funded yet, but I'm glad, look,
Yeah.
we're way ahead of everybody else based
Yeah.
upon what was done 20 years ago. So I sort of look at it from
You're
that
always going to
perspective.
have some members in town meeting who don't agree with that. They,
The part that I guess I disagreed with, and of course you'd expect that, was it was an agreement to put it into a line item of the budget and raise that line item 9%. This year, Frank, and don't mind me, can you, Mr. OPEB, sees an extra $500,000 that he just wants to plop into OPEB in addition to what he agreed with town meeting on. So I don't think we should go beyond that. I think we had a well thought out schedule to increase those funds. And now it comes up at the end of the town meeting, we didn't have enough money, according to Frank, such he wanted to postpone the building of a sidewalk that most people felt was important. Now, I would say take it right out of the OPEB. Let's revote that. Let's take the $230,000 out of the $500,000 going to OPEB, because OPEB is already well funded.
I'm not sure that he said that we didn't have the money for the sidewalk. I'm not sure if that was the argument, but
I think he said he wasn't sure. We're not sure if we have the money, so let's check into it.
from the standpoint of a liability, it's extremely volatile, OPEB. So we anticipate that amount is going to fluctuate greatly over the next 30 years. So just from basic financial policy, and again, this was a decision by the OPEB subcommittee on the Ways and Means, that if we had an opportunity to provide some extra funding in there, having the money in sooner, as just about anything in your financial life, really has a very profound effect. 30 years from now, the money's in there sooner. It's making investment earnings. Those investment earnings are making investment earnings. So even a sum of money such as that really could have a very positive impact down the road in the future. So
I understand, but you understand also that we had some very expensive projects hooking up to NWRA, plus a new facility for DPW. Those are expensive projects, and I just feel that $500,000 could have been better keeping down some of the debt, could have been better used towards these huge long-term projects. And those are just the down
the
payments.
suggestions were made by the Ways and Means Committee. That whole free cash plan is submitted to the Ways and Means Committee. So that's really an opportunity. We look at it as a lot of good options as to what to do with that free cash. Paying down debt, that's a great option. We did do a little bit of that this year. We had the $3 million paving allotment that we would typically borrow for. We did fund that with free cash. So there's a lot of good choices. So when we get to that point where we have that discussion with the Ways and Means Committee, I see any decision that's made on the table there as a good choice. It might be a different flavor from one person to the next. You may prefer to pay down debt. Someone else may think a good use is to put it into OPEB. Someone else may want to put it into stabilization. But from my standpoint as a financial officer, it's just different versions of good decision. I feel like we can't go wrong with whatever the committee decides. Whatever the committee decides on that, I feel as though it's a positive for the town.
That's a little deceptive, because it's really just a subcommittee, Town Hall 1, 2 people that decides how to spend all the free cash. Comes up with the proposals.
We put placeholders on there for transfer to stabilization. We identify projects that we plan to borrow for that the free cash could be paid down towards. So I do believe that there's more of a discussion than that. They provide a roadmap as to what it may look like, but it certainly goes before the entire committee. Again, I look at it as a lot of good choices there. So I don't.
you have, from day to day, a very special view with regard to what's going on. You're right at the heart of, you're right at the spigot, as I said earlier. And I'm sure you hear things here and there. Do you have an idea, or do you have a thought with regard to where we're going with a landlocked forest? Is that something that is going to be, how can it be of benefit? Right now, I'm not sure that many people use it as a natural resource. Any ideas with regard to possibilities or?
Well, we had a nice committee that looked into that a few years ago. So
Yeah.
that was a very, very well-run committee and a great presentation to
Yeah, I
town
think
meeting. So
Paul was on that committee, I believe.
I think town meeting had its say on that one a while ago. Does that mean that the town may wish to bring it up in the future? You know, most likely, I would imagine that it's something that the town will be discussing. You know, for a
Yeah,
long.
but you have a
long
very
time.
special perch. Do you see it as being something of significant value where it's right along the highway?
It does. It has tremendous value, and I think one of the biggest things that we've come through as we were looking to site the DPW and the fire station is that
Yeah.
we're very land poor as a
Yes.
community. We don't have a lot of available municipal land, and you know, a few years ago there was this huge discussion about cemetery space. We're running out of space in the cemeteries, and you know, whether or not you agree that's a good choice use of land or not, you know, that's everybody has a different opinion on that. But we're very land poor, so from that standpoint, you know, you wonder, you know, how could the town, you know, possibly utilize some of that land for what we may need to do in the future, whether it's a school or recreation facilities or fire
Yeah,
station.
that's
Or we're
along
really
the lines
we're
of
really
what I
short
see.
on municipal property, so
Yeah. It is a valuable piece, and I'm sure that when a decision is made, it'll fill some part of our needs.
Let me change it just a little bit.
Sure, go ahead.
Appreciate it. We talked a little while ago about the changes in personnel in Burlington. And just this year, again, let me just mention, building inspector is going to be retiring, fire chief, town administrator, treasurer, and we just recently have a new person in charge of recreation and a new librarian. What's the chief librarian's title?
Library director.
Thank you. So that's an awful lot of change. Is there something happening? Why people are leaving or bailing out of town government?
No, I think
Any
it's
dissatisfaction that
no,
town
not at
meeting
all.
should know about?
Not
They're
at
just
all.
all so happy they just want to retire, huh?
Well, I think that's everybody's dream is to one day retire. So when you get the opportunity to, it's again these things go through cycles. So there's a big problem with an aging workforce in local government. If you talk to Mr. Petrin, you'll know that within the town administrator, town manager function, a huge amount of people his age or who started with him who are on the verge of retiring. So there is a shortage of what I've always felt as though there's a real shortage of assistant type positions in most communities. So, you know, there's no assistant DPW director. There's no, we're really lacking on middle management. So there's not a lot of people training for these positions in a lot of communities. So
And do you think that's what's stressing out all these people who are leaving the town or just have left the town?
no,
Is it stress?
I don't believe that at all. I haven't seen anybody who left for any reason other than that you know the time was right to come, time to move on and time to retire. We're very it's really a great place to work. So you know, I selected Burlington. I didn't have to come here. I wanted to come here, and I think many of my department heads that I work with feel the same way. So
I'm
it
asking
will
you as a-
continue to be challenging going forward. It's becoming very competitive out there with all the positions where, you know, communities will try to steal your department heads.
John
and,
touched upon that at town meeting. John Petrin.
you know, communities are moving forward and advancing their pay and classification systems, and they're trying to do different things to attract people to come work there because there is such a shortage of qualified people in many of these positions that are just available to be recruited. So
Well, I guess it's not just Burlington because John Petrin was mentioning that several abutting towns were also looking for
Yeah,
a new town
looking
administrator.
at competition.
Anyway, we could just we spent
was
20 we spent 20,000 to do a search.
20,000, yeah, and they had
Couldn't these towns pool their resources and just do one search and just share the costs of finding these new administrators?
Well, I just recall at the time we were in a real competition for Mr. Petrin at the time. I was on the search committee, and we were in competition with another community for his services. So
Would you
Oh,
mind
really?
there's
mentioning?
no pooling of anything. You're in
So
you're
you-
arch rivals when it comes to this thing. So you know there's no sharing with other towns.
So
We're actually in direct competition.
Just like the Thanksgiving Day football game.
yes,
You're saying it's
exactly.
the same
I
thing.
was-
Your opponent are
We
these other
literally
little-
advanced our process by a week or two just to ensure that we got the first crack at him at the time. So.
I was surprised to hear about John. I didn't realize John came from Billerica. He was originally
Sanchez.
with Sanchez, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, not,
And then
not Petrin,
Arlington.
John Sanchez.
Billerica first, and then Arlington.
Yeah.
Who's the
You have indicated in a few ways your pleasure with regard to being employed and being part of the Burlington town government. How do you see the future? You know, where you're close to the numbers and you probably have a pretty good view of, you know, we mentioned something like OPEB, but it's just one. You sort of have an overview of what's going on. What do you see down the road, and are you happy with what you see?
He's staying, so I think he is.
well, the
I'm assuming you're staying.
the outlook just in general is very difficult on local governments on many levels, right? The state is unable to finance us the way that they you know have been mandated to in the past. So state aid is relatively flat for us. You know, there's always a pressure from the residents to maintain an appropriate taxing level. So we really have a lot of pressure on future revenues, and trying to build a sustainable budget and a sustainable community going forward, where the amount of revenue matches up with the amount of expenditures, and you know, being able to provide the services that the residents have become accustomed to. I think that's going to be an ongoing problem for any city or town, you know, in perpetuity.
Do you think people are being squeezed out of Burlington?
I can't really speak to the local.
I say that because in my own neighborhood, my immediate neighborhood, I have seen no less than probably $20 million mansions go up.
Yeah, I mean that's an. I'd like to see more opportunities for the seniors that would like to turn their house over and not leave town. You know, I think that there's definitely a pressure there. I mean, I think it's
I've got an idea for you. Don't raise taxes. What's the likelihood of that happening?
Well, you've seen the statistics on the taxes, and you know, we're very cognizant of every resident's tax bill is very important to them. And the bill on your table is the one that matters to you. But I think you've seen all the comparisons in Burlington is a very, very affordable place to live in comparison to any of the communities around here. And again, affordable
Yeah.
means affordable for Eastern Massachusetts, which in the big scheme of the country is probably not affordable. But I mean, in comparison to our counterparts and our peers, we like to feel as though the level of services that are provided in conjunction to, you know, the amount of expenditure and the property tax bill, we feel as though it's the best deal around.
Can I just follow up with this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is there any help for seniors who can't pay, who are having a very difficult time with increased taxes?
Yeah, we
Thank
have
you.
we have some
That's
really good
what I was gonna
programs.
touch upon.
There's some
great.
very good programs available at the assessor's office. They
So
have some
that-
pretty strict guidelines as to,
But that's who they would need to contact, is the assessor's office.
yes, the assessor's office, and there's also a really great program, and in my entire
I think
career,
this is news, okay? I think this is important.
No,
well,
I've heard of this.
town meeting votes on the abatements. we set the highest standards for abatements and the most allowable abatements that state law allows us to. So the town meeting's been very generous in that regard. I will say that the requirements to qualify are pretty stringent. So you could theoretically be having a difficult time financially, but your income isn't low enough to meet the level, or you have too many assets. But I would check with the assessor's office on that. Probably the best program, and throughout my career, I've always found it confusing as to why more people don't participate in it. But there's a program called the Deferred Tax Program.
Yeah.
And under that program, if you meet certain age guidelines, what you're able to do is fill out some forms at the treasurer's office, and what it'll allow you to do is defer your property taxes, so not have to pay them or not have to pay a portion of them. What happens then is it goes against the property as a lien, and it accrues interest, I believe, at approximately 4%, which is a great deal compared to delinquent taxes, I think, are 14%.
So you defer the amount that you've got to pay, and they keep tabs, and so when you go to either relinquish or sell.
Yep, you go to sell it, it gets taken care of at the closing, similar to any other lien. It's really, it's a really great option for people who don't have the cash flow and want to make their financial situation a little bit better.
Would they be knowledgeable about this at the senior center, or do you really have to go right to the treasurer's office or right to the assessor's office?
I do believe that they probably are aware of it over at the senior center as well, the personnel over there. But like I say, it really is a good program. I know a lot of folks from the older generations, they want to turn over their home to their children or whatever unencumbered. So it's a source of pride, I think, for a certain generation. But it's a really good program that, and again, it's a voluntary program. We'll voluntarily, you won't have to pay your taxes. It'll go against the property.
Can be a big lift.
It can be it can work for somebody in certain situations. So,
because I do notice, I talk about all these homes that they're building, these huge homes, and every one of them is $1 million, $1.2 million, or 990. But I do notice that some of the people that are, and as a matter of fact, today, I saw one of the houses on Skilton, and they had emptied everything out of the house, and it's obvious that someone bought it. I'm sure that a builder and you'll see a big home there, and you have to wonder where the person, and I think it's an older woman that used to live there. You have to wonder about where she goes and what happens, and is she moving out of Burlington? Affordability has been, I think, eroding a tiny bit in Burlington, and I guess it's a function of big business, especially what we see on the other side of the big divide. So it's probably necessary. The only thing you can do is hope that you stay within that area, within that margin of affordability. But it can be difficult. I don't know how you control something like that. I mean, you can't deny people who want to come in and buy a piece of land for $400,000 or $300,000.
It's a big problem, not just here in Burlington, obviously, everywhere in eastern Massachusetts. Many of the places where middle class people lived are now Somerville.
I used to
places,
think of Somerville as one of the dumpiest places in the Boston area.
Charlestown.
Now you can't live there.
South Boston, North End.
North End.
It's happening everywhere. It's not a problem that's unique to Burlington. But again,
and
I think
you can't stop it. There's no way of controlling it other than to try and keep as level as you can, with what you have. That's a problem. Anyway, you enjoy your work.
I do.
You enjoy Burlington.
And you enjoy
your
the staff, the people you
associates
work with.
I do, yes, very much.
Your associates are all working, friendly. You just mentioned a little while ago with regard to the general trust and feeling between the people. We saw a little bit of it last night in town meeting. You're going to be here for a while.
I hope so.
You're appointed by the selectmen?
Yes, for the town accountant position is appointed by the selectmen, and the assistant town administrator is appointed by John. So that portion of my position. So I have a dual reporting responsibility.
When
there.
are you going to take your children in to work to show them what you do?
Well, they're 21, huh?
My son has come over here a few
Has he?
times when he
Good.
was younger. We, did the fun stuff and toured the fire station and things like that.
And
but,
Maria?
meh,
No, she
she's
doesn't
not
want
very interested. So,
How old is your son now?
13.
Wow, so he's probably playing a baseball game tonight?
He is. Yep.
Well, how's he doing?
I could check on my phone. There's an app for that, so.
How do you see the future of Burlington? I think you've really pretty much touched upon it in some ways with regard to the numbers and stuff you were talking to Larry about. As long as we keep tight reins, I personally, I don't know where these big monster mansions are going to stop. I just see them as coming in. I can't tell you how many I've seen in the last 2 years, 3 years. They're just, and it seems as though every time, it's just amazing. One day the house is down. 2 days later they're in digging. And it happens all the time. And I have every reason to believe that it will continue in Burlington. So I think there's going to be a big part of the population that will not be able to move into Burlington. And on the other hand, I think there's a more select portion of the population, though, business people who have. So I think the character of Burlington is going to change. It's not like in my neighborhood, slab homes for, I think it's 50 years. Campanelli, big old contractor, I think out of Framingham, put up at least 50 slab homes. They're going out one by one. And I mean, a lot of them have already been pushed out and they're putting up big, big homes. So I really think Burlington is, it's always been on the cusp of change, but I think it's going to be even more significant in the near future.
Well, on the residential side, I mean, on a positive side, I think that speaks to the desirability of the community. People want to be here. I like to play a little game. If I'm someplace and I find out that someone's from Burlington, I sort of secretly say, hey, what do you think about Burlington? And I'm really overwhelmed by the responses from the people. I don't tell them who I am and that I work for the town or anything, and they're just absolutely joyful to live in Burlington. They won't stop telling me all the great things that are going on in town, and they love the parks, and they love this, and they love the schools. So I'm always overwhelmed when I hear that from somebody, just from an ordinary citizen who I've never come across, not a town meeting member, doesn't come to public meetings, just a regular person who's living here and going their life. So that I'm always so I think the plus side of the people wanting to come here is it shows what a desirable place it is. It has a great location. We have great restaurants. We have excellent schools. We have excellent parks. We have really excellent services.
Well, the restaurants are mainly for the business community, but hopefully they'll work that in this next season where some restaurants will be for the community. I wanted to get back to that one question before we wrap up. What was the biggest change you saw in Burlington? You talked about the financial system in Burlington and the reportability, but how about the town itself in the 12 years?
12.
That you've been here?
Well, I think biggest change just overall.
From accountant's perspective.
Oh, accountant's perspective. Well, believe it or
Not
not,
accounting, but the town in general, but from your perspective, unique perspective.
well, I think it's amazing what has happened on the development side. The work that was done, 10 years ago, to plan for the future of Third Ave and to plan for the future of the district. That was really great stuff, and I think that it's kept those properties really on the cutting edge of, being modern and desirable places for businesses to want to come in. So that stuff is kind of interesting to me.
Appreciate that perspective.
But Millipore, I'm always amazed by the quality and the caliber of the businesses that want to come work here. And as you know, it's the town worked really hard to make this a desirable place for businesses as well, with retail opportunities, food opportunities. You know, I think Burlington was ahead of the curve in that area, and I think the real challenge for the future is going to be how do we stay ahead of the curve so that, you know, businesses want to locate here as well, because it's such an important part of our local economy, and you know, they pay a large part of the property tax freight. So I think it's going to be important going forward to, in order to keep the place relatively affordable for the residents, we're going to have to sort of stay on the cutting edge of what is the future of you know, office space, retail. We're going to have to see what the next generation of that will be.
When I think back, or when I have read, I think it was in that volume that, what's his name, the teacher that put out that book on history, John, I can't think of his name, Fogelberg. And I think it was in his book, there was a racetrack next to 128 at one time, and there was an outdoor theater, a drive-in theater in Burlington at one time. When you think of that and you look at what Burlington is today, you know, it's
all
like
amazing.
this. It's amazing.
We'll continue to keep it a nice town, good place. Not too nice, not too many higher taxes. But I did want to just wrap up a little bit, just so we could mention who our next guests will be that we have booked. Would you feel like going into that?
You want me to?
Well, I know that you had the list. Our next guest is June 5th, and that'll be Chief Kent.
Yes,
After
Chief
that,
Michael Kent, Police Chief Michael Kent. And then on the
either 12th or 19th will be Scott Lively running for governor.
Yes, Scott Lively running for governor.
And that'll bring us into the next year, or next
We're at the end. Thank you, and thank you very much, Paul, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate coming.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And you got to come back a year from now.